Hey guys, welcome to Massive Iron. Welcome to the Massive Iron podcast. Today I am joined by Jason Gallant. Is that how you pronounce your last name, Jason?
Yes, sir.
Gallant Bodybuilding, correct?
Well,
Gallant Bodybuilding.
Natural Gallant Bodybuilding is the name of my
Natural. Sorry. You know, we've both been on YouTube probably forever, and this is the first time we've ever crossed paths. So this is probably going to be a pretty interesting conversation because I always find it interesting when you take a couple of older school we'll call ourselves seasoned lifters, and just let them compare notes when they haven't had a chance to talk much beforehand. So, Jason, I appreciate you joining me. Before we hop in, can you tell everybody about yourself and where they can find you?
Okay. Thanks for having me on here anyway, Steve. It was great connecting with somebody that has some experience. It's good to, I always like talking to people who have some experience and are in the realm of reality, right?
Right, reality, not playland where we don't actually get to test things on ourselves.
Yeah, like they're not living in a bubble. I like that. So yeah, I'm on YouTube, Natural Gallant Bodybuilding. I have a Rumble channel as well where I do fitness vlogs and stuff. And yeah, I have a website called naturalgallantbodybuilding.com. My background is I've been training for about 35 years. It's all like a blur now. And I competed in natural bodybuilding. I was Canadian champ in 98. In 96, 97, I won the only natural bodybuilding contest there was. I won the overalls in 96. I won my division in 97. Then 98, I got my pro card. So I was the first natural pro in Canada in the WNBF. And then I did some fitness modeling and went back and forth to Gold's Gym. And I was featured in Muscle Media with my twin brother in 1997. And that was my big claim to fame back then. And then from there, I did the cover of Natural Bodybuilding magazine and Exercise magazine. So I was really trying to make a living in natural bodybuilding and failed horribly, but that's my background. And so, I just competed as a natural bodybuilder and personal trained, probably like yourself, you just to basically found the route where you could promote yourself and put yourself out there. And that was the only thing you could do back then is compete in a few shows. There was no Instagram. There was no like posting a bathroom selfie and selling programs,
Yeah,
the toilet. He makes more money than me competing and winning a trophy.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about the bathroom selfies. Sometimes when some folks follow you on like Instagram and you go over their profile, it's like all the same picture with different clothes. Like the same selfie. Like I'm not judging, but it's just a little weird, right? It's just
when everything's on the toilet, they're like, "See, I squat."
Right. So, but between us, we got like 70 years of experience. I don't know if that amounts to much, but that's the number, right? That's the number. So, like, I got my story about how I got into lifting. I went to college in New Mexico in 1986, and there was nothing to do, and they had a gym, so I started putzing around. And I had an English professor who was a bodybuilder, and he would kind of toss out these little nuggets of advice, and even to this day they hold up well, and that kind of got me started with my love for bodybuilding. Tell us a little bit about yourself. When did you first really start to train seriously or run into the sport of bodybuilding or muscle building?
Well, I talk about it quite a bit on my channel and stuff, and so hopefully people that are tuning into this don't get bored to death, but it all started actually when I was about 4 or 5 years old. I mean, it's kind of pathetic. I remember when I was trying to become a writer, I was trying to write fiction books, and I'd hear these stories about people. I remember when I was 5 years old, I was writing my stories, and that's how I became this great author. And it was extremely frustrating to me because I was like, who the hell writes books when they're 5? You know what I mean? But anyway, I was around the gym all the time because my dad was a competitive powerlifter. And that was his thing. I remember him jogging with weights on his back and doing chin-ups perpetually outside, and then going to the gym and doing his 2-hour workouts with deadlifts and squats and wrapping his knees up in belts and all this stuff. And I would just be always in the background. So I was almost like introduced to it, not because of enthusiasm, but because I was just always around it. So when I moved to a new community when I was only 5 years old, I moved from the east end of the country to the west end. The kids were a lot different. They were a little bit, let's just say, more rambunctious. They like to bully you, feed you worms, and all this rest of this stuff.
Right.
And so there was this one kid. I remember he broke my crayons and said, "Sorry, man, I'm too strong." And every day he used to wrestle me down outside And I started to say, geez, Dad, how do I deal with this guy? He goes, oh, you got to lift some weights, and I was only 5 at the time, 5 or 6 years old. And so I started lifting this 20-pound dumbbell up and down like a power clean. And that's all I would do. I'd do a couple sets of that. And then I do that 2 or 3 times a week. And then after about 3 weeks, that same kid tried to wrestle me down. He couldn't anymore. So I learned at a very early age that weight training did something. And so I was kind of a lazy kid, so I never continued it. Once I could beat David Bisky up, it was, yeah, okay, I already accomplished my goal. I don't need to train anymore. I'm already the king of Mount Olympus, right? I don't need to do anything. So again, the same, you could say, karma came back around when I was 14 years old, because I was naturally a pretty small kid. I was only 100 pounds, 105 pounds in grade 9. So I was a real late bloomer, and I had a twin brother. So the problem is with being a twin is that everybody notices you, but nobody wants to get to know you because it's too weird, because there's 2 of you. I don't really know how to commute. Like, who are you? Are you Jamie? Are you Jason? I don't know. So you were a great target for bullying. So I became one of those guys that would get, thrown across lunch tables and different shit like that. So the journey of weight training started again. So it was more a journey of survival and actual destruction of my enemies than it was this beautiful artistic wise thing that we know it to be now. So that's really how it started. I started training like that at 14 years old, and then I never quit from that point. But I would say fear and anger is what drove it in the beginning, all ego. And then once I started to get to 20, 21, 22 years old and started to see life from a different perspective, then it became more about, oh, this is the way that I feel good in this body,
So I want to ask you a question. You mentioned you were kind of the skinny kid, and when I went off to college at age 18, I weighed like, I don't know, 152, 156, whatever, and I was skinny fat. I looked like, I'm 5'10", in the 150s, and I looked like just fat I looked like this melting glob of butter with no muscle, right? Man boobs and a little bit of a belly. And I got naturally small bones. I think my wrist was like 6.2 inches. And the reason why I mention this is because I want to see your opinion, your experiences. When people see me now, they automatically assume you have amazing genetics. It was handed down from the heavens, and it was always your destiny. I'm like, man, I was a sack of crap. That was weak.
Beanbag with eyes.
Right. Do you get those comments, and do you really feel like you had amazing genetics, for the sport?
Yeah. You start to resent some of those comments when you know how much blood, sweat, and tears you put into your your whole journey. But I realize that there's genetics of where you start, and then there's genetics of how you adapt, possibly. Like, I'm open to that. Some people seem to respond better to any type of stimulus, whether it's sitting in a chair and eating garbage, or whether it's, they almost have a body that has high adaptability. And in Ayurvedic circles, which is in ancient Indian medicine, they'd call that Ayurveda, which are like tridoshic, where you have the different constitutions. It's kind of like mesomorph, endomorph, and ectomorph combined in a way, to oversimplify it greatly. But that would mean that the body would have a higher level of adaptability. So maybe you have that. Maybe you have a little bit more of an adaptable sort of thing than some guys. But I do say that I had really great genetics. I would say I have like top echelon genetics for shape. At least I did, before I partially tore a bicep from a chiropractor yanking on my arm in a funny way and dislocating the shoulder. And, I'm like Frankenstein now based on the history. But at the time, I had really great shape, and so did my brother. We're twins, right? But at the same time, I had really horrible genetics when it came down to being just a big person. So I had to work and work and work just to put on muscle. And even if I was at my peak of bodybuilding, 210 pounds, 5'8", I wasn't like, these monster, strongmen that could smash me like a mosquito, right? So I was still strong, but I wasn't that type of genetics. I would never have been a strongman genetic type of guy, right?
So I got a question for you. I talked about this the other day. On my podcast, I just was rambling by myself, and back in the day, before the internet, when you got into something, when you got into a hobby or an interest, there wasn't all this distraction, right? You didn't have video games. You weren't staying up till 2:00 in the morning, and you didn't have the constant access to people on the internet. When I got into lifting, it was just sleep. You sleep, you go to bed, you eat. Eating wasn't that hard. I ate in the surplus, and there was fewer distractions. And I didn't find muscle building to be all that difficult because I had my sleep down and my food down, and it was just I was in that kind of that tube, without all the distractions. Do you think it's actually harder nowadays, with all the information and all the distractions for people to kind of, sort through all this you know, and if they're just sleeping and eating and training, do you think muscle building is really that difficult?
I find that question extremely interesting because I think you're saying a few different things in that question. But one of the things that I really embrace with what you're saying is that because people are looking outwards all the time at information, they're not paying attention to the first piece of information, which is what their body is showing them in that moment.
Right.
So that they're always looking externally, like, oh, what happened with Steve? What happened with Jason? What happened with, this person or that person? Or what happened to the people at the gym? Or what happened to somebody on Instagram even? They're not even actually using real socializing to get something. Because, when you have friendship with somebody, when you're interacting with them, you learn and you exchange ideas and stuff.
Right.
Whereas if you just see somebody on Instagram, you're not necessarily having any sort of relationship. You just see a picture and then you compare yourself to that picture and say, geez, I didn't meet that expectation. Maybe I should do what that guy's doing, but you don't know why or the context. You always get those comments on your channel where somebody says, oh, you're an idiot because you're doing something wrong, but they don't understand the context of why you're doing something the way you're doing it.
Right.
So I think relationship is the problem. I think people are so disconnected from relationship, which is based on this disassociated society we have. We have people connecting to pictures on the internet, but never getting in touch with the soul of the person. And if they actually had a real conversation at a coffee shop with you or a gym, or just sat down and said, hey, Steve, how you doing? Like, what makes you tick? Why do you do what you do? They would embrace so much more of what you've learned instead of taking everything out of context. So you're right. They're looking externally at information, and they're not looking at even the first relationship, which is you, the source of information. They're not even having a relationship with you, therefore misunderstanding what you're saying. And then let's take another step back. They're not even looking at the relationship with their own body to see what's going on. If their body has a bad pain or a good pain, they almost learn to ignore it because, hey, Steve didn't have that pain, so I shouldn't have it. So I'm just going to do what Steve did. And then they snap something. So I believe relationship is really the big crime right now. People are out of touch with that. And back in the day, we were forced to be with ourselves.
Right.
And we're training, and nobody was putting us on the cover of a magazine. Nobody was putting us in a selfie as we're taking a dump, at the gym.
Right.
We're just, we're just sitting there training and seeing, okay, my biceps, they feel bad or they feel good today, or I felt like my strength went up, and really paying attention to what's happening. And sure, we had the muscle magazines and stuff, but at the same time, you try those things and then see what worked. But you didn't have criticism right away. I find that criticism right away from people prevents your own discovery process, because sometimes it takes a bit of time or a duration before you find out whether your experiment works or not. But people seem to be so scared of getting something wrong that they don't even want to invest the few minutes or the few weeks or the few months into finding out whether this workout technique works or not, because insecurity is driving them. Because once again, they're always pandering to an audience that doesn't care about them instead of real friendship or real connection.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure you get more than your fair share of comments on YouTube. I call them like drive-by shootings where people don't really watch the video or take time to really even know who you are and what you're about and what your journey is about, and they just kind of like, oh, he said this, fire off a round and move on, right?
Well, the funny thing is, I always say that they're the type of people that would criticize Stephen Hawking for not running the 100 meters fast enough.
Right.
They don't take into account any stuff that's happened to you. You could have a huge injury or a problem, and that's why your body's moving a certain way that they don't like now. And, but they'll just come in and just say you're doing stuff wrong, not understanding. And it's a lack of humility on their part. A lot of times they don't understand that life happens. Yeah.
Yeah, how you train now and how I train now and how anybody that trains, that has trained seriously for longer than 10 years, their training is an accumulation of experience and injuries and personal choice and personal preferences. And none of this is really ultra serious. But if a beginner who has access to all these programs nowadays and optimization, and they know everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they look at your training, and there's a variable that doesn't make sense. It's very natural for folks to be reactionary. This is stupid. Why aren't you doing this? That's not convention. Um, uh, you know, you can't view someone's current program based on what what is optimal for a beginner, because we've been through so many miles.
Well, also they're seeing things through the veil of inexperience, right? Like when somebody learns the alphabet, they think that's the same thing as writing Lord of the Rings. If you're just learning the alphabet and you learned a couple words, the ego always comes up and says, I've mastered the whole language now, right?
Right.
That Lord of the Rings book, he said things wrong because that's not ABC in the direct order, right? So this oversimplification of life and of training is really an ego thing. And it all boils down to the same thing again. It's a lack of relationship. If they actually had the relationship enough with you to have the conversation, it would be a huge enlightening experience, because they're like, oh my God, I didn't even know about these other things that you experienced in this 30-year path that happened to you, right? And a lot of times I find, again, if relationship was deeper, if people just took a minute just to have a relationship with the person, they would probably find out a lot more things than just by reading something in a Google document somewhere.
Now, I want to ask you a question about, this is an interesting topic, because anybody that's been lifting for a long time and has worked with people and has a lot of personal experience, with lifting, and you'll get on YouTube and you'll see some voice proclaim something or make a statement, and you'll react like that's complete bullshit, right? Like inside your head, you're like, that guys that have coached or that have a lot of experience tend to be unified in the fact that they can see the bullshit, whereas the somebody that's new and doesn't have that experience doesn't necessarily have that. And sometimes when you speak out against that madness, people think you're just attacking somebody. But the basic what I'm trying to say here is, when you get a group of coaches or trainers or athletes together that have lifted for a long time, and they have a really good sense about when somebody says something that doesn't align with real world experience.
No, for sure. I agree. Like most of the experienced people that come on my channel, like they come and they make a comment or whatever. It's amazing how open-minded most of them are. They'll say, hey, this is what worked for me, and it's different than what you're saying worked for you.
Right.
But they're open to the fact that there are certain variables at work that are different in each human being that may be applied at each time. And I find the best coach isn't the coach that just takes a program off the internet and just applies it blindly. A real coach would say, hey, okay, let's try and start with this template. But when they see that the person is horribly, destroying some part of their body because it just isn't working right for whatever reason, history, injuries, or just genetics, they would change the variables, right? That's the difference between coaching and just making a buck through telling people what they want to hear. And it's so easy to make money on the internet if you want to just create controversy, which I noticed that you haven't done on your channel, right? Just attack people blindly and just create these wars and stuff. Like that negativity starts to attract views.
Right.
Or tell people like, hey, you can shred by eating pizza every day of the week,
Right.
Right? You
Yeah,
can shred up and get abs and whatever. Like, yeah, don't worry. If you're 500 pounds, I'm going to give you all the ice cream and cake you want, but you're going to shred up, right? That's what people want to hear, and people fall for it because we're in an immediate gratification society right now. And it's always been like that a bit. But I find that it's people keep falling for it. They keep falling for it.
I'm going to be honest here. It reminds me of a V-Shred ad. I mean,
Yeah,
there is literally a V-Shred ad where he talks about you can lose weight eating the foods you enjoy.
Yeah, and I mean, you know what? He's a marketing genius. You know what I mean? I understand it. He's just catering to the people's ego. He knows they don't want to hear the truth, and he's giving them what they want. But at the same time, in the long run, you might make more money that way, but you're not doing any favors for people because they're going to find out the truth eventually. Because the truth is always the same. Truth will always be discovered eventually if people keep meeting life. And it's not as glamorous.
Guys that have been at it a while, like we generally agree on about 98% of things. And the things we might not see eye to eye on, we both understand that generally they aren't the important things. A lot of it's highly individual. Um, so when someone comes to me about a coaching philosophy from another coach, I understand that either we're going to agree on 95% of things, or that coach is either going to be, so dogmatic that we won't even be able to have a conversation. And I don't particularly worry about people like that. I mean, if you can't communicate, there's really, nowhere to go beyond
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I had a big fight with a trainer at the gym. He's about 25 years old. And he was telling me how he read a study, how BCAAs are all bullshit. And I'm like, okay, but there's something I'm noticing when I'm drinking them for the odd time in the gym. I'm noticing an energy boost for some reason. And I'm noticing my workouts can extend. I was getting a little bit more of a pump, and there was no caffeine, nothing. And he's saying, oh, it's all placebo. I'm like, well, and he's saying, oh, it's all because of sweetness. If you drink sweetness, then you get the same sort of thing. I'm like, well, I was having sweet coffee all the time, and I was having a different experience, or sweet other drinks, and it was not giving me the same sort of thing. Then Charles Poliquin comes out and says, and he said a lot of things, and he was a big strength coach. Are you familiar? You're familiar with Charles Poliquin, I'm sure, yeah. And he said that high doses of leucine can have some sort of anabolic effect and increase in performance. And leucine is in BCAAs. So I was like, okay, this is kind of one of those things where studies haven't proven something yet, but only through experiencing your body and where your weak link is, because maybe somebody else that digests protein very well, maybe they won't even get anything out of something that's highly absorbable through the stomach. I don't know. But I've noticed that when people are just constantly just looking at paper, but not honoring the experience that the person is having, there's going to be a problem or a disagreement every single time. Like when I say, if I squat ass to the grass, it feels like my kneecaps are going to hit the ceiling, and the person's like, well, then you just got to go lighter. I'm like, okay, so I do it with body weight. My kneecaps still feel like they're going to hit the ceiling. It's
Right.
obviously not the right thing,
Well, funny you mentioned that. Back, you mentioned Muscle Media magazine. That was kind of a game changer, in the whole industry. But we could talk about that a little bit later. But it kind of turned me on to creatine, and I always found in the gym that my pumps were better when I took 10 grams. But if I say that on the internet, I'm going to get blasted because 5 grams is the holy grail, and you can never take more than 5 grams. There's never any reason to take more than 5 grams.
So
But
stupid.
I always felt personally, in my journey, that when I took 10 grams, I always had a much better pump. Not that I was necessarily chasing the pump,
But
it
I'd
was
say you're
just
right. You're right, because I noticed when I worked at a vitamin store and I was taking protein shakes, which also you're not supposed to combine with creatine, and I put creatine and glutamine in there, and I go to the gym, and I have 2 or 3 of these at the store, massive pumps. Like at that time, I was noticing a big difference from that. So I'm confirming that what you're saying, it makes sense to me, 100%.
Yeah, and I know we have studied creatine, ad nauseum. Like there's so many studies out there, but I don't know. It's just one of those things that's my personal experience. So I'm going to stick with it. And, it's not like if somebody takes a little bit more creatine, they're going to die. So it's not that critical
Yeah, I
of
know.
an issue, right? So when you, back in the early days, were you a Muscle and Fitness Flex type of magazine reader, Iron Man, any of those?
Well, I would read them, but I would never buy them. But my dad, because he was an enthusiast of anything weight training, he always had them sitting around the house. So I remember my mom would always get sickened by looking at those magazines. She'd see the cover and see some guy that's emaciated and shredded on the cover with veins everywhere, and she goes, "Ah, yuck!" It reminds me of skinned rabbits, right? Because her father used to hunt as a kid, so she couldn't stand looking at those magazines. But my dad would have them around all the time. And my dad was always doing insane things. He was kind of funny, but he was almost like a mad scientist when it came to training. Like he'd make his own equipment and stuff. Or I remember one day he crazy glued wooden blocks to his shoes so that because he couldn't afford to have the calf shoes that were in Muscle and Fitness at the time. So he'd be walking around the house. And so he'd sound like a fucking horse. It's like clunk, 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 clunk. He's walking around in these shoes with just the blocks on his toes. So using crazy glue was funny as hell. So yeah, we had those magazines around, but when Muscle and Fitness or Muscle Media, came out, that was a game changer because there was actual real discussions about stuff that was going on in studies and personal experience and what works for the body. And once I started reading that stuff, like yourself, I became addicted. My brother and I we'd be, chomping at the bit for when the magazine was going to come out the next month. So
You
we
know,
really enjoyed that magazine. There was a lot of useful techniques in there. And yeah, it's too bad that we don't have a lot of magazines like that right now. Everything seems to be an ad now, but yeah, no, it was great.
I was the Weeder gave me a lot of information. I mean, without the Joe Weider magazines and the Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding,
Hmm.
I probably would have never learned about splits and how to train and exercise selection and that stuff.
Hmm.
And he contributed a lot to the industry, but he held such a tight stranglehold over information that when Bill Phillips came out and it became more about transformation than just pure bodybuilding, it was such a breath of fresh air for me. I don't know if you ever watched the original Body for Life VHS tape back in the day when Bill Phillips had his first competition. Is that
Hmm.
something you
Yeah, I
watched?
think I watched a piece of it here and there. Yeah, I don't know if I watched the whole thing, but I think I did see clips of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just for me, it was a game-changing moment in the industry where things became more about personal transformation, your personal story, than
Hmm.
just trying to look like Arnold.
No, and I love that, and I think the reason why it worked is it boils down to exactly what we were saying earlier. It's experience, not just comparing to some god somewhere. You're just saying, okay, what am I experiencing, and how do I transform that experience into a different experience? But in the end, it starts with you, right?
Right.
And yeah, no, I love that. That's why I think it was so successful. It took the average everyday person and said, this is how you can start. And this is how you can make a difference through just simple techniques that are tried, tested, and true. Just
Now we were having a conversation before we started, and it was a pretty good conversation on deadlifts, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit and maybe rehash some of that. When I started, my magazines, no one talked about the deadlift at all. This was back in '86. It just wasn't an important muscle building lift,
yeah,
and I didn't see people in the gym doing it. I never saw it at all. I didn't even learn about the deadlift until 2006 when I worked with a power lifter, and it just wasn't a lift I did. I was just always doing other back exercises. But you kind of had the opposite direction. Your dad was a power lifter, so you were exposed to the deadlift early.
yeah. That was a frustrating thing for me because I saw powerlifting. I experienced it. I was around it all the time. My whole house was shaking because my dad had a gym in the garage, so the plates would be hitting the floor, 400 or 500 pounds, bang, bang, over and over. So I remember dinner time, the plates would be rattling in the cupboards, and so my dad was always doing this. But at the same time, when I went to go lift weights at the gym and started to do more lower body stuff and do more back training, when I started doing the deadlift, it just didn't seem to agree with me. And I ended up herniating a disc in my back because my dad knew one technique and one technique only. This was his main technique, was strain until you shit your pants. And that's how you lift weights. That was my dad's old school way, right? And because it worked with him, he's like, oh, this is how you do it, right? So, I knew on bench press, push towards the eyes, and yeah, strain till you shit your pants. And that's how you do a deadlift. So I did that, but I'd rounded my back. I lifted improperly and herniated a disc, of course, and it ruined my martial arts career that I was having at the time. I was in karate and stuff, and then I couldn't lift my left leg because of too much lower back problems. And I had to choose between bodybuilding and karate because of that. So deadlift actually was the crux of that decision, where I had to decide where I was going to go. But yeah, just like you though, when I went to the gym, even leg training, I was the guy that trained legs, and my brother too, and a few other guys. But most of the guys, like I said, were walking around. They looked like golf tees. They didn't have any legs. They had some shoulders and some arms, but they weren't interested in training legs. That was too hard, right? That stuff was uncomfortable.
Right.
And yeah, deadlifting, that never happened. I mean, you never saw that. I never saw that stuff until about 2001, 2002. Then I started to see people start to incorporate the deadlift because there was a couple of guys that started to get interested in powerlifting. But before that, you never saw it. I just saw heavy shrugs. That was about the extent of it, and heavy bent over rows from time to time.
I got into squats just because of Tom Platz. Without
Yeah.
Tom Platz, I would never have even gotten into squats because I was basically a fatherless child. I didn't have a dad, and I kind of had that rebel streak in me when I was younger. Counterculture. I didn't want to be like Arnold. I wanted to be like Tom Platz because he was doing something different.
It makes sense.
And
Yeah.
I think if it wasn't for Tom, I would never have squatted. So I can
Mhm.
sit and say, I love the squat, but without Tom Platz, I probably would never have squatted or deadlifted until 2006.
I think that the time that I started squatting, because like I said, I was around it, but when I started squatting was around 16 years old when I was playing some rugby and I wanted to increase my sprinting speed. Squats might not have been the best way to do it, but that was what I was trained into. Hey, leg training is going to help sprinting speed right away.
Right.
And also, there was another thing that happened. I was walking in high school, and you had tighter jeans in the 80s, right? And I was
Right.
walking down the hallway, and then some girl yelled down the hallway, "Jason has no ass," right? Like,
Right.
so,
Right.
so it's like, okay, squats it is, right? So I started squatting from there. Then, yeah, that's where my squatting journey began.
You know, when you, I want to hear your thoughts on, I'm sure you've watched the evolution of training over the years. We had the full bodies, and then the Arnold splits and the push pull legs, and then we woke up one day and muscle protein synthesis was everything, and we all of a sudden moved back to full body workouts, and then we had the evolution to these minimal style programs, which were so heavily barbell focused. I like to call it the cult of barbell,
Hmm,
where you have to, like, the over obsession with the big lifts,
hmm, hmm,
with the big three,
hmm.
and where everything else was kind of a redheaded stepchild. What are your thoughts on this obsession with the big three?
Yeah, well, I can't even. It's so hard to follow. I just want to start first of all. It's so hard to follow the different cult belief systems that happen. I can't even follow them. Half the time somebody makes a comment, they say, "Hey, what do you think about this and this type of training and that type of training?" I'm like, I don't even freaking know what you're talking about, right? Because I haven't researched enough to know what the latest fad is. And it's like there's always another reinvention of the wheel that's going on in order for somebody to market a program, in order for somebody to make a buck, right?
Right.
But I have a feeling in a very strong sense that when you sell something to somebody, you're doing it because that's what worked for you or what worked for some of your clients, but not because it's just reinventing the wheel for the sake of it to make a buck.
Right.
And so the big three lifts, the one thing I like about them is that they are traditional and it's just basic. It's like saying, hey, lifting weights, let's just start with tension and getting stronger. We'll build some muscle. But that doesn't mean it ends there. It's just like saying the internal combustion engine is a way that we can get some horsepower. You don't just stick at 4 cylinders. You start to get to 12 cylinders at some point, or you start to play around with some turbos or whatever. So I find that, again, the big three lifts are horrible for some people. That's the problem.
Sure.
Some people will bench press and get nothing but shoulder pain. Some people will deadlift and get nothing but back problems. And some people will squat, and because of their dimensions, they're going to squat in a way that is going to put stress on a totally different part of their body than maybe they want to for their bodybuilding gains. So I guess it depends on what their goals are. But I feel that in this, let's just say, I don't want to use a controversial word, but in this world of confusion right now, we have people mixing everything together. It's kind of like saying, hey, let's have cake, ice cream, and liver sandwiches, right? And they try to mix it all together and say, okay, because we mixed it, it must be better. But there's a reason why certain lifts do certain things. They put stress on certain muscles in certain circumstances, but you don't apply that lift in, say, CrossFit. Like some people doing deadlifts to failure, and they go to extreme failure, they start to realize that there's a reason why powerlifters usually stop a rep or two before they hit failure, because once the form breaks, that's when injury happens, right?
Right.
And I knew all these guys that used to walk around the gym, and I used to call it doggy back because their ass would be, curved underneath their spine as they're hobbling around the gym because they did deadlifts a couple reps too much the day before, and they heard a snap or a popping sound. So I think what happens is that people, they think that if they see a guy with a physique and he deadlifts, then the deadlifts must be responsible. And there's some sort of confusion there. They're not necessarily conducting an experiment on it. They don't know that powerlifting and bodybuilding are not the exact same thing, although there's some principles that do cross. So I'm not a deadlift fan. I only Romanian deadlift. I did deadlift from the ground, but because of my short Tyrannosaurus Rex arms and long femurs and stuff, I find that And even watching my brother deadlift, because he's my twin, right? So we're dimensions of the same. Like I can actually imagine if you could step outside yourself and watch yourself lift, Steve.
Right, yeah.
It's pretty cool. It's kind of like the Matrix, where you can actually walk all the way around like 360 degrees, you know. And I can see, I'm like, man, you look really fucked up when you lift like that, right? And I'm like, okay, that's what I must look like. So
I was kind of the opposite. Like I have longer arms, and when I found the deadlift, I'm like, hey, I'm pretty good at this lift, and
yeah.
I really got obsessed with it, and I could handle it really well.
Mm.
But then you wake up one day and you're like, oh, there's kids that weigh like 50 pounds less than me. They're just killing me. I think I'm going to give this up as a sport, right?
Yeah, well, there's probably a lot of different reasons for that. As a natural lifter, it's tough to compete against guys that aren't. But in the end, your heart didn't explode, so that's a good thing.
So you brought up a point I want to maybe chase you down this trail a little bit.
Right.
You mentioned stopping squats and deadlifts, away from failure. I think I only failed in 37 years. I've only failed 2 squats because I've always been very conservative with how deep I push squats because I always knew the return on investment what could be, potentially not so good, right?
Yeah.
So in our industry, a lot of folks tend to lump all exercises together in the same pool.
Yeah.
Either you can take all exercises to failure or you can take none to failure. But the reality is every exercise is different. Some you can take to failure without any issues at all. Some, if you push to failure, the risk is great. What are your thoughts about, folks that try to lump all exercises in one big pool on any topic without there being any nuance?
Well, first of all, what you're saying is genius. I've actually mentioned something like this before, and I've noticed not too many people talk about this subject, or at least I haven't seen it too often. So you're one of the first people that's actually brought it up to me. You're absolutely correct. There are people that when they lump things in the same category, they're not understanding that if you have muscles that are responsible for protecting a joint hit failure, well, if there's no joint protection, what happens? There's a snapping problem or the joint hits an injury, right? And with lower back heavy exercises, if people don't take this into account, they don't realize that, hey, I might be able to do bent over rows for 5 more reps, but my lower back isn't able to maintain proper form.
Right.
You're going to injure yourself. But bicep curls, there's not so much stability involved. I mean, the elbow joint is much different, and the shoulder joint is much different than all the facet joints in the spine and the discs. So yeah, I used to see that back in the day. I knew this guy named Richie. I'm not going to say his last name, but this guy was honestly, this guy's ego could barely fit through the door half the time, and he had a nice physique on him. He's actually great physique, nice shoulders, decent back, but very bodybuilder-ish, but not necessarily balanced. Like he didn't have the back and leg development that you'd say would be optimum for a bodybuilder. But beautiful physique, always 6-pack abs all the time. Always had a girl on his shoulder. You know what I mean? Like he was just one of those guys. And so he got obsessed with doing deadlifts for a while because he's like, hey, I'm the king of the world. Why? I'll master this deadlift thing in a couple of weeks. I'm going to start doing that. So he got up to decent weight. He was doing 3 plates, 3.5 plates for reps. And then he started pushing like he did with bicep curls, forced reps and just go as deep into failure as you can. Right. Well, he only lasted a few weeks before something snapped and he was hobbling around the gym. And then he would also get his friends to go into failure and they'd apply the bodybuilding principles to that deadlift. And they were all hobbling around too, where they injured their back. And then the deadlift career was over for all of them. They just quit deadlifts. But the tragedy of it is that if they would have looked at the deadlifts and said, it's a different animal in itself, you can't push into failure like bicep curls with deadlifts, then maybe it would have been a constructive exercise for them. It's not necessarily the deadlift's fault of why they get injured. It's because, like you said, they put it all in the same category and said it's the same thing as bicep curls. So I should treat it the same way with the reps and the failure.
Yeah, the problem people get into is when they take one rule or one concept and they try to apply it to everything.
Yeah.
One rep range, like we have to do all 5 reps on everything. Like, no.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Like every exercise is different. Barbell rows, it might strain your lower back more, or maybe Romanian deadlifts. If you get beyond 8 reps, maybe it feels more of a cardiovascular strain. Everything's different. Every exercise is different. Every body part is different. And that's part of the beautiful thing about bodybuilding and the art of bodybuilding is when you develop that awareness that all exercises are different, all body parts are different, and you have the freedom in that playground to kind of explore, I think you're in a good place where nowadays everyone's trying to create rules like you can train to failure, you can't train to failure, you must use 5 reps, or you have to apply this principle to everything.
Mm.
And I don't find that to be productive at all.
No, you're totally right. Just rules or steadfast rules or dogma are only for blind and unaware people. And we all start that way, but that's obviously not the end goal. The end goal is for your awareness to expand and for you to say, "Oh, I found that this is true for this, but over here with this exercise, there's something different that's being shown to me, and this is wisdom." And you're showing me that you have some wisdom here. I mean, because that's really what I'm pointing towards on the channel. I keep on telling people, like, listen, I mean, it's great to start with a template, but this oversimplification of one rule fits everything and everybody, and that's the other thing, is that each person, like I've had so many discussions and interesting discussions with people where they're saying, Jason, I find if I bench press, I get too much chest development, right? Where me, I get too much shoulder development in some cases. And other people are like, hey, how do I actually hit my front delts no more? I do inclines and I get too much upper chest development. I'm like, I've never heard that, but this person has that experience, you know? So it's really important for awareness to be the first teacher, not some dogma somebody reads on the internet or some one rule fits all.
And along those lines, if you like something, Jason, that
Mm.
isn't convention, you're somehow not you're shamed for liking it. Like if you never flat benched and you only incline benched and you enjoyed it, it's just lifting. It's not life or death, but we develop these conventions where that try to push out, things you like to do in the gym. Not everything you do in the gym has to have a rule or has to make sense. Sometimes in life, we just do things because we enjoy them.
Well, play is the fertile ground of discovery. So when you free yourself up to play, again, you're doing something that's extremely wise. If you're doing something that you enjoy, sometimes there's a reason why your heart is bringing you there. And there's this instinctual wisdom that is in the body. And a lot of people they discount that. They think they can cerebral everything. But a lot of discoveries were made before understanding happened, right? Some people think they have to understand something before they can make a discovery. That doesn't make sense. There's not logic to that. In order to discover something, you have to experiment and play around. And the great benefit of playing and enjoying what you're doing is that you're going to show up more often and you're going to get more results in the end. And if anything, you're going to discover something that other people don't know, and then you will get more results. Like when I was doing strategic range of motion stuff for bodybuilding, and I always had people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're doing it wrong." And I'm like, really? How come my arms are 3 inches around bigger than yours? Or you're doing that squats wrong. And I'm like, well, how come my judges at the last competition I talked to said for me to stop training my legs? They got too big, and I'm only doing 90-degree squats at the knee. So I had all these people that would tell me what to do, but the very rules that they were living by were crucifying their gains. They were not experimenting enough and going outside that structure to find out what really worked for them.
Agree or disagree with me here, but nearly everything important that's ever been done on this planet has been driven by passion,
Mm-hmm.
as a foundation. And, you know, I can't stress enough to young lifters, just find what you enjoy, find what you and use that as a starting point and then build out from there.
You're absolutely correct, because passion is going to drive you through the inevitable adversity, because there's going to be adversity. I mean, not everybody has the same adversity, but when I dislocated a shoulder in hockey, it was like a career-ending injury for me. Like when I pose now, it looks stupid, and it's like my bench press went down because now one shoulder's pushed forward and the other, so now I'm bench pressing sideways when I bench. If I didn't have the enthusiasm for training itself, and I was purely just looking at my body and say, okay, if it meets my expectation, then I'll enjoy myself, I would have quit. I wouldn't have been able to continue.
So we got about 15 or 20 minutes left. I want to change directions a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem.
I got into YouTube about 11 years ago. I just I had a meetup with some other lifters and we recorded videos and I put them on YouTube so they could see them. And then I got this bright idea in December of 2011 to make my first educational video on YouTube, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's turned into this wonderful thing that's given me a career. And I, it actually, without YouTube, I wouldn't be here today. So tell me a little bit about your history with YouTube. How did you get on it, and what has it meant to you?
Well, it started just as curiosity with video because I was not a very computer savvy person. So I was always watching YouTube or watching people make movies or different things. And I was like, wow, I really enjoy what they did there. How do they do that? And it would kind of be like this conundrum. And I wanted to experiment a little bit with what video is in photography and movie magic, you know? So it didn't start as a YouTube channel as far as training. I just started a training channel because I wanted an excuse to look at pretty colors. So if you see on my channel now, I'll mess around with the colors and I'll try to get a certain type of shot or something. I'm trying to basically play around creatively. And that's where it started. But I was very surprised and shocked when I got on YouTube at first with the adversity I got. I'm like, okay, I got second in Natural Universe 2 years in a row, third in the heavyweight division Natural Universe. I was on the cover of magazines, all this stuff. I'm going to give this free information away. People should, probably appreciate it, right? When I got on there, I got nothing but hate, and you're doing everything wrong, and wow, you're an idiot, and what's wrong with you, you creeper, all this stuff. I'm like, holy shit, like, how is there so much adversity? Like, if Tom Platz would have got on YouTube back in the 80s, I would have been fascinated by what he was doing, right? Or Lou Ferrigno or any of these guys. And when I got on there with an actual history resume, it meant nothing. It was like I had to reprove myself all over again. And that was the biggest shock. But in the end, it's been a great journey of creativity for me because I can make my own, music. I can do video and at the same time tell bad jokes. And obviously bad jokes are my lifeblood. I like that. So putting them on YouTube is kind of fun. And yeah, it's been a great creative endeavor, and that's what spurs me on. I really enjoy it that way. And some of the people you meet along the way, just the laughter is great. You get so much negativity, but you get people that are so funny. Like I know you've probably got a lot of funny comments on that T-shirt you put up with that guy that was like harassing you. Would basically say I'm the best and this and that with the accent and the bad spelling. That was hilarious. And I saw the comedy's golden, man. I just love that shit. That's great.
It's funny in YouTube, sometimes you'll get the drive-bys that will be like, oh, your channel sucks and it's dying and all this kind of good stuff. But at the end of the day, one of the important things for me is that I developed a tribe, I developed my people. It's not about numbers for me, and it's never been about numbers. It's always been about information and reaching the people who want to hear you, right? Who value your information. Because, if you have somebody like Greg Doucette or Athlete X with a huge, huge, following, I don't know that I would be able to have that same level of one-on-one interaction and community.
No, I mean, it would be impossible. I mean, just the sheer amount of emails you already get in a day or throughout the week is hard to keep up with. But if you had numbers of millions of people coming and going, and sure, it would help make the YouTube channel sustainable because it is very difficult to make a living with even a sustainable community. It's tough to just get by.
Right.
But at the same time, yeah, you're right. I mean, you would never be able to. You probably wouldn't even recognize half the people that comment regularly. Where now, I mean, I pretty much know, oh, that guy, I see him every week or every, I have this ongoing relationship with the screen names. Like we're always watching as YouTubers. We know like who's the bad guy, okay, this guy, I'm just banning this guy because he's always negative. Like he never has anything positive to say. It's like, okay, you're out of here, So yeah, so it's nice to be able to interact with people. And some of the stuff, I've become friends with some of the people. I've actually, not only have they become patron supporters or supporters in some small way, we have odd conversations about other aspects of life outside of it. Sometimes I'll jump on Blackout on PlayStation 4, play a video game, this thing. And then sometimes they'll jump on there, play a game with me or something. So it's been kind of fun that way.
So you mentioned a PlayStation 4. That's the only platform I have right now.
Oh,
and
nice.
I'm a Rocket League addict. I'm not sure if you play Rocket League at
I
all.
haven't played Rocket League. I've heard of it, but I don't know. I'm not familiar what Rocket League is. Is it a
It,
one first person
it's
shooter or something?
it's like soccer with cars, and it sounds really
Okay.
lame, but if you're competitive
Yeah.
and you are like you're somebody that's like, okay, he beat me there, now I'm going to learn.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of strategy, but that's my release every night when I can escape and do that for 20 or 30 minutes while my wife's in the shower.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you'll have to add me on there then. I'm Natural Gallant on PlayStation 4. You just add me on there. Yeah.
So let's talk about a little bit about in the modern landscape. I'm not trying to go into a negative space, but like, what do you see that bothers you in fitness or in YouTube? Are there any things that really
Hmm.
you just like, I wish that would just go away?
I think that it's really been the main theme of what we talked about. I think it's the fanatical thinking that is the most annoying. The fanatical thinking based on no experience. Like the people who have no experience seem to have the highest amount of beliefs. Like they seem to be so like invested into this separation and this hatred because they believe something that they haven't tried, tested, and true. It is not a tested sort of theory. They only have applied it in a small little petri dish, and then they say everybody should do everything their way, otherwise they deserve hatred and and fire and brimstone. So I would like to see a little bit more self-discovery. I would like to see more discovery or openness to just trying things, seeing if they work or not. That's the main thing I would say. I know this is a very general statement. I'm not really isolating any one particular person, but I would like to see that. The other thing I would like to see is less manipulation through lies. Like there was one YouTuber that was using fake plates to do bench presses.
Right.
I don't like that. I don't like it when people are lying and producing content and giving people false ideals about them. They're representing themselves falsely. I would like to see less of that as well, so that at least there's a true conversation between them and the viewer. Because every time you betray somebody's trust, that lack of trust they have inevitably affects their future relationships as well. So then they start coming on your channel, and when you say you're a drug-free athlete, they're like, "Oh, I don't believe you because this last guy lied to me and this and that." It's like I don't like that sort of thing. So I would like to see that stuff clean up a little bit. I'd like to see a little bit more play. I'd like to see people not take themselves so seriously and just have fun and enjoy this whole process and discover along the way.
Yeah, one of the things I've mentioned a lot over the years is that lifting is not life and death.
Yeah.
Um, we try to sometimes we have a tendency to suck the life out of the
Yeah.
joy out of things
Oh, shit.
through over analysis and bullshit.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, lifting is a fun. It should be a fun thing. It shouldn't be, so serious that we're afraid to deviate or to play or to try new things. And I don't know. For God's sakes, don't talking about these lifters that use fake plates, or even the athletes that invent exercises to make you think they're working their glutes just so they can stick their ass in the camera.
Yeah.
A lot,
Yeah.
a lot of this is just nonsense, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's funny. It's like I said, it's like this. It's a big pissing contest because people in the end, a lot of them want acceptance. They want people to like them, but they hate people in order to get people to like them. It doesn't make sense. It's like as one wise man told me one day. He said the road and the destination have to be the same. So hate can't lead you to love. Unhappiness can't lead you to happiness. It's like you have to find some way to, enjoy what you have right now. And yeah, it's just really a fun path in a lot of ways when you really discover stuff. I'm discovering stuff about my body now because my body's different. That's actually making training fun again. Like doing stuff like really light flies and then pressing the shoulders out a little bit to see, because I've got shoulders like go gadget arms now because of the
Right.
hockey injuries and the dislocating shoulder, and trying to see how can I hit certain muscle groups that I couldn't hit before, or that I was too married to taking things seriously 10 or 15 years ago. But now I can play around and see, how can I really enjoy this process, and maybe I'll get some results in the process as well.
Yeah,
So
that's one of the beautiful things about training is that there's always something new around the corner.
hmm,
There's always a new piece of equipment or something new to learn. You'll just be going along your path one day, and and you'll run into something new that feels good or interesting, or like it didn't, like something you've never experienced before. I got a during the pandemic, I got a leverage squat
Hmm.
machine, and it was a $700 investment. It wasn't a cheap investment, but you get bored with just squatting in your home gym. And this thing's been a complete game changer for me. I wish I had it back in '86. It's such a
Hmm.
brilliant piece of equipment, and it's just an example of turning the corner and running into something new.
Yeah, no, it makes sense because sometimes you want to take the lower back out of the movement, and if you can do that, but at the same time still have the hips move properly, you sometimes can hit that magic bullet of exercise that gives you more results than ever before.
So I want to talk about one more thing before I let you go, Jason, and that is nutrition. We didn't talk about nutrition at all. In my day, I grew up in a world where my mom might get a bag of potato chips once a month or ice cream once a month, and maybe a takeout pizza once a month. Maybe we might go to McDonald's once a month, but it was easier to keep our focus for me back in the day. Um, and nutrition now is all, it's just being consumed by convenience, fast food everywhere, junk food everywhere, and healthy eating has just become so unnormal and so unnatural. How do you in this day and age deal with that? How do you stay, what's your daily path look like on nutrition, and how do you avoid all the pitfalls?
Well, I still eat some garbage here and there, but I try to keep it. And I think this again boils down to awareness of your own body. You know when you feel like shit, like you've been training for 30 years, 35 years, you can tell what you ate the day before, how you feel the
Right.
next day. And I noticed there's a very strong correlation with the amount of protein that I have the day before and the amount of carbs or fats or whatever, if they're good or not, and what I feel like the next day. And I noticed that my motivation starts to go down and down and down because it's almost like I'm struggling just to get enough breath or energy if I eat the wrong stuff. So that's the beautiful thing about the gym. It's kind of like a racetrack where you're constantly testing what gasoline you put in the engine, and that's really the biggest gift of it. But I didn't eat great in the early years. When I was a teenager, I ate way too much junk. I had a real fast metabolism. It's like I was like a blast furnace. Anything that went in just went out. It was one of those things. I didn't really learn how important nutrition was till my first bodybuilding show because I was forced to stay on a regime of. I was doing low fat at the time. I was doing starches and protein. It was a very simple diet for a real fast metabolism guy, and I got lean for the show just doing that, eating as much protein and carbs as I wanted, as long as I combined them together, and that was good. And of course, years later, my metabolism shifted, and then that didn't work anymore, and then I had to lower the carbs down and play around with fats and all this sort of stuff. But I'm also noticing that simplicity is the answer for me. Like I'll eat a can of mackerel, and it has 40 grams of fish fat in there. Like I don't know if you've ever tried canned mackerel, smoked
No.
canned mackerel in water. There's a stuff from an eastern province in Canada, actually, this one company, and their mackerel is actually pretty good. And it's just in a can. It just you eat it and you notice that wow, I feel pretty good. It doesn't taste the best, but it's
Right.
easy. I can take that anywhere, and that's really what I found is convenience. I went to the car dealership the other day to do an oil change, and I sat outside with my can of mackerel and ate that. Right?
So you're being very scandalous here. You're eating food that doesn't always taste great, but that makes you feel good.
Yeah, like, and you know what? And that's exactly. I knew you'd understand it. Obviously, you would because of your physique and stuff. That sometimes what makes you feel better tomorrow doesn't necessarily make you feel better in this moment. Like immediate gratification isn't the answer. And that's the thing. You got to really learn that if you really want to have more results in anything. But yeah, I do that. I eat sardines, which again tastes like dog shit half the time, but I like the minerals in it, the calcium and all the other trace minerals like selenium and stuff. So I eat it for that. And then I'll have prepared chicken breast. So I'm trying to stay with more protein and fat for my energy, and then I'll have a starch meal here and there, because I'm discovering that when I have a starch meal once in a while, I notice that my body heat goes up to the roof, and it seems like it kicks on the metabolism somehow. I'm not sure if that's just bro science or what, but I'm trying to find out if this is going to help me carve off fat more efficiently than just staying with protein and fats. And so
Well,
I'm kind of going back and forth in that sort of discovery right now.
yeah, if you don't mind me interjecting, like,
Mm,
that's basically the way, I prefer to eat now
mm,
is, Very protein and fat. I don't overdo fats, nothing like
Okay.
a keto. And some people misconstrue that on social media, but
Yeah.
I focus on protein and, I get my plant-based stuff, my veggies and mushrooms and berries and things like that. But heavy starches, I don't do that. I'll do that like every second or third day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I don't do it as often. I really don't eat oatmeal anymore. It's not for any dogmatic reason. I just find that I tend to run better on that, and
Yeah.
just having starchy carbs every now and then. I just feel better, and I feel I perform better.
Yeah, and that's what I'm noticing too. And I'm not sure if it's an age thing or because the hormones in the body change or whatever, but I notice that I feel pumpy and lumpy, as I say, when I eat the protein and the good fats naturally occurring, like not adding extra fat to my meals, like people are throwing olive oil and all that. I don't do that.
Right? That's
Um,
ridiculous.
but fish fat is great, and naturally occurring fats that may happen in a steak or say a whole chicken, like with some skin on it. I don't mind eating that stuff, especially if I'm having a lower carb day. But then when I throw the carbs in here and there, then I notice my physique then fills out just a little bit if I do it a little bit. If I do it too much, then I just start getting fat and I feel like my energy's up and down all over the place. So I find I get a much more stable blood sugar. And then it's almost like my insulin receptors are more sensitive to the carbs when I eat them only once in a while. But if I have them all the day, or if I have them all the time, I find the burden almost like desensitizes the receptors or something. I don't know what it is, but
Well, you're
yeah.
talking to somebody that I nearly killed myself through eating, bad food. I had really bad type 2, and I lost 100 pounds. I didn't read this in a book. I just lost 100 pounds, dumping carbs, white sugar, white flour, processed food, fast food. I just basically ate meats, fruits, and vegetables. And now I feel just like you do. I feel better, and I feel like I perform better when I don't have the heavy carb every day.
Yeah, and especially with an anaerobic activity like weight training, you don't need a ton of carbs. Like when I was playing hockey and I tried to apply the lower carb rule, well, didn't work quite as well. I noticed that when I needed to access fast, explosive energy over and over again in a cardio capacity, doing sprints over and over again on the ice, I was burning so much calories that I needed to take in carbs at that point. Otherwise, my heart rate was up 10 beats a minute more or so, even more. I was noticing I was out of breath, and I was like, "Hey, I just been only skating for a minute. What happened here, right?" But it depends on your activity, and again, I think it really depends on your personal constitution, and it depends on the type of exercise you're doing. And yeah, if you're having too much carbs, which are fast-acting energy sources, and you're not doing a lot of types of exercises or activities which require that, then why are you taking them in? It's just gonna be garbage calories at that point.
I'm going to finish off with one more question for you, and then we'll hop off. I'll let you go to your rest of your weekend. But um, you mentioned a point, and I think it's an important thing that I try to stress to the younger guys is that when you're younger, your body is more forgiving. You don't
Yeah,
notice what you eat and how it impacts you the next day. But both of us, I think it's safe to say, what you eat today, you know exactly how that's going to make you feel tomorrow. So if you decide to have pizza and a couple beers, your stomach's probably not going to feel the same tomorrow, and your energy level is not going to feel the same tomorrow. You're more tuned in,
hmm.
and your body is less forgiving. Would you say that's accurate in your case?
Yeah. Definitely. It's almost like there's a, let's just say, when I was 20 years old, if I ate a pizza or something, I noticed that there was a small fluctuation the next day in my energy, or it wasn't as noticeable to me. But now it's almost like a big gong. When I eat something, it's like the next day, it's like, okay, I'm very aware. It's almost like an elephant in the room. That's
Right,
it's
right.
like, okay, I'm training through something, and I notice it in my reps. Like, say I'm doing bench presses with heavy weight, I'll notice I'll lose a rep or two if I eat too much energy food and not enough protein food. And it's crazy, like how your body becomes so in tune. It's like a skate blade, right? You notice if the edge is not sharp, it starts
Right.
sliding all over the ice. So yeah, I definitely have to make sure my diet's on point. Otherwise, it affects my performance directly, and I can measure it almost immediately the next day.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the combination of inflammation through extra, sodium and junk carbs and decreases your quality of sleep, and it just you just know how you're going to feel the next day is not going to feel obviously how you'd like to feel. Well, Jason, I appreciate you joining me. I'd like to have you back anytime you want to hop on and waste an hour just talking about stuff. It was a great conversation. And before we head off, remind folks again where they can find you.
They can find me on Natural Gallant Bodybuilding on YouTube or Natural Gallant Bodybuilding on Rumble. And yeah, I have a website called naturalgallantbodybuilding.com. There you go.
All right, man. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you later.
No, thanks a lot for having me, man. It was great talking to you, and we'll definitely do this again, and we'll talk about some really interesting stuff next time.
All right. Bye now.